Welcome, everyone. I'm Linda Baker, the Learning Director at the Center for Research and Education on Violence Against Women and Children. We are delighted to bring to you from the Knowledge Hub and the Learning Network our webinar on conducting research with Indigenous populations. 460 people registered to hear Dr. Healey speak today, and we're so pleased with the response, and we know that you're going to receive a lot from this presentation. A little bit about our speaker. Dr. Gwen Healey was born and raised in Iqaluit, Nunavut, and is in this community that she continues to live and work with her family. She is the Executive and Scientific Director of the Qaujigiartiit Health Research Center in Iqaluit. Dr. Healey received her PhD in Public Health from the Dalalana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. Drawing upon existing community strengths and resources and strengthening capacity to conduct research in the North is the key to addressing a number of health concerns presently and over the coming years. For this reason, Gwen founded the Health Research Center that she will probably refer and tell us a little bit more about in her presentation. And we're so pleased that Gwen is with us. We had a lovely call with Gwen in talking about and thinking about this presentation, and we're so pleased that she's able to join us today and present for us. Our format for the webinar is to hear from Dr. Healey for 1 hour, and then while she's speaking, if you have any questions, if you could just type them into the chat box and we'll track them. And then during the last 15 minutes of our webinar, from 2 o'clock to 2:15, we will present as many of your questions as we can to Gwen for her response. The presentation slides and the webinar recording will be posted on our website within the next few days. And once the webinar's over, Sarah will send out a link for evaluation. You'll also find that link in the chat box. We really count on your evaluations. It helps us learn what was most effective, what could we do better in bringing you these webinars. And she'll also send out the link where you'll be able to find the recording and the slides once they're up and ready to go. We like to remind you that occasionally Dr. Healey's voice may disappear or may appear high and squeaky, and that's not her real voice. That's just the quality of the sound system once in a while when it becomes out of sync. It will right itself right away if you'll just be patient. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn our presentation today over to Dr. Gwen Healey.
Thank you, Linda, for that very kind introduction. Can you hear me? Just want to make sure. Yes, okay. Great, thank you. Wonderful, thank you for that very kind introduction. I think I heard you say 460 people. I was not expecting that many, so that is very exciting. So my goodness, I hope I can live up to what you might be expecting from this presentation today. So thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm going to be speaking primarily about my context here in Nunavut, but I've identified a few areas where I'm sure it translates into other communities across Canada, other Indigenous communities that we've worked with and we continue to work with. And some of the ideas that some of the concepts we've learned in our experience doing research with our communities and for our communities. So I'm going to talk about Piliriqatigiinniq, which is the Inuktitut word for working for a common cause or working together for a common good, which is the name of our community health research model. And as Linda said, I'm going to provide a bit of an introduction to myself and our center and our context, and then we'll go into a little bit more detail around some research concepts, and then I think there will be time for questions at the end. So without further ado, I will move ahead to the next slide. Yes, so I'll tell a little bit about our story and the model and move on from there. So as Linda said, I'm from Iqaluit. I was born and raised in Iqaluit, and my training's in epidemiology and public health. And a lot of the work that I've done in the last 10, 12 years has been around the idea of explaining to the academic community what Inuit research models look like and methodologies, and then as part of that, looking at different Indigenous research concepts more globally. And all of that kind of stems from our center and how our center came to be. Qaujigiartiit is an Inuktitut word, which means looking for knowledge. And our center was co-founded by myself and by the late Andrew Talat Sr., who was an elder in my community. And we founded the center together in 2006. He sadly passed away last year, and we miss him every day. And we're grateful that the center continues to live on as part of his legacy. So Qaujigiartiit is an independent, community-driven research center. Our center is led by Nunavummiut, by the people of Nunavut, and we work with our communities to identify health priorities and to take action on them in a way that helps meet the needs of our communities. So our center really grew out of a climate of research happening, health research happening in Nunavut, that really focused on what was of interest to perhaps academics and other researchers who would come here and study something interesting and then leave, and often with the data. And so we weren't always getting the information back. Our communities were not feeling very good about those relationships, and there are a number of issues and challenges that we face in our communities that we really need data on to inform evidence-based practice. And so our center really grew out of that climate. So we focus on answering the questions of our communities, and all of the data stays here in the territory and is used in different ways for advocacy and action and evidence-based decision-making. And so for the last, now we're celebrating our 11th year of operation, and we've been able to bring in more than $15 million in research and training funding into the territory that would never have come here otherwise. So we're pretty excited about what we've been able to contribute to health and wellness in our communities. So in this presentation, I really wanted to set the context for why it is we do what we do by explaining where the center came from, and on a larger scale where we kind of fit in grand scheme of things in research in Canada. And we've really observed an increase in the amount of research happening in our communities. People talk to us about it all the time. They say, oh, there was a researcher here last week, and there was a researcher here the week before that, and as part of that, so there's kind of a general interest, increasing interest, and then part of that, increasing interest, there's a growing segment of the research community that's focused on explaining and understanding Indigenous knowledge in different ways, and Indigenous ways of knowing, and articulating ways, and then our communities are focused on articulating the different ways in which that knowledge can be protected and shared in ways that are respectful, and in ways in which the power in the relationship is is really weighted towards the community, and communities have more involvement in making decisions or articulating how the information is shared and how it's used in ways that benefit the community. And so the presentation will focus on how we developed a model to articulate Inuit perspectives on health and research, and then the methods that grow out of that. And with the intent that perhaps explaining our context can help inform others who are in similar situations, and really to expand our dialogue on what research looks like when it comes from an Indigenous worldview or paradigm. I'll click this mouse. Here we go. Okay. So as I was saying, Qaujigiartiit was created in 2006 out of this climate of health research here, and we started with a part-time staff member. That was me actually. Me, part-time out of grad school. I'm back home, and I was kind of pulling all these people and ideas together, and we really grew out of, there were a lot of like-minded individuals in the community who really believed that this type of center could have a positive impact on our research landscape. And now we have 4 full-time staff. We have 3 summer students who are all from Nunavut, all in some studying some form of health or Indigenous studies, and then we have 3 doctoral students that are working with us, and then right now we have 10 casual staff across the territory working on different projects. And so we have quite a few people here now, and everybody comes from a different background: technology, Indigenous studies, health, nursing, epi. So we're quite a collective, and we're hoping to continue to grow and expand. And so part of our growth and expansion really is as a training and education center as much as a research center. So we provide different training workshops to help people develop skills in interviewing and basic research methods and proposal writing. We want our communities to have the skills they want to lead the research journey for themselves and for other community members to answer the questions they have. And our center doesn't have any core funding, so we live on a wing and a prayer, as I always say. We operate on a project-based funding model. So I think this says 12 million. Yeah, it's 15 now because we just got 2 big grants 2 weeks ago. So I haven't updated the slide since then. But we work on a project-based funding model. So basically, we have to compete for the funds that we have, and against other universities and other research units, and we win them. And so I think that's a testament to the innovation and the capabilities of our communities that we apply for these grants and we win them in pretty competitive environments. Oh, thank you for that very kind comment in the chat box. So where do all the topics come from? Well, between 2006 and 2008, we had this wonderful little pot of money that allowed us to travel to the different regions of our territory and talk to community members from all walks of life about what their health priorities are. And so that involved stay-at-home moms and nurses and policy analysts and the mayor and council and all kinds of people who had an interest, high school students, and would come out to these sessions and talk about the important health topics, the topics that were important for them. And from that, we developed a list of 5 health priorities that people wanted more information about. So the first being mental health and well-being, and these were ranked as well in order of importance. So the first being mental health and well-being, and all that encompasses. Physical health and well-being, which people sort of articulated as nutrition, cardiovascular health, injury, oral and dental health, and things like that. And then healthy family life, so how we support our families to be healthy, and children and maternal-child health. The fourth topic was traditional and spiritual values. So the values, the societal values of our communities, and how they are articulated and celebrated in ways that support health in our communities. And so that includes their relationship with the land, and the relationship with the animals and the environment around us, our relationships with each other and our communities, and how we support them in positive ways. And then the last topic was just kind of an amalgamation of different ideas, but really is about how we make positive contributions to our communities. So how are we well enough to pursue all of the things that we want to, whether that's education or some other kind of livelihood, harvesting and the arts, and the different ways in which we make positive contributions to our communities. So those were our 5 topic areas, and they continue to guide us to this day. There's every week, every month, people come to us with new questions and new ideas, and we're happy to do our best to act on them. So our model builds on the strengths of our knowledge as community members, the innovative and solution-seeking spirit that's inherent in how we live in the North, and the capacity that exists in our communities to foster a healthy environment for our children and our grandchildren and their grandchildren. Often people talk about the need to build capacity in the North, and we really prefer to think of it as strengthening the capacity that already exists. So we do have a lot of capacity here. I think the dominant narrative about our northern communities is often deficit-based, and we aim to articulate a different narrative, to flip the script, to show that we have capacity in our communities, and that we can strengthen it and use it to our advantage to answer our questions and ultimately to improve the health of our communities. So onward to the actual model. So Piliriqatigiinniq, working together for the common good. So as we were creating the center, Andrew, the late Andrew Qaujigiartiit Sr. and I, we had a few conversations about how are we going to do this, and what does it look like to answer questions in a way that mirrors the expectations of our communities in doing so. And so if we're a research center created by Nunavummiut, how are we going to do research? It's a deep question. And so it's embedded in a discourse now about decolonizing research methods. So placing Indigenous voices and epistemologies at the center of the research process. So I included all these references in case anybody wants to go find them later. There are lots of really interesting pieces of writing about this, and these people are much more knowledgeable than me. So I would encourage you to find their books and their articles as well. And I'm still very young in my learning journey about this topic, but I'm happy to share what I've learned so far. So placing the voices of our communities, of course, at the center of our work was critical. And then looking at the underlying assumptions in how research protocols are developed. And for us, we really work within a model that values all kinds of knowledge, wherever it comes from, that everyone has something to contribute in a positive way. if we're all communicating effectively and sharing what we know in a way that contributes to the overall good of our communities. So we were thinking deeply about that, and the ways in which we can be creative and solution seeking. And so these are sort of some of the underlying conversations we'd had about this model. And so we developed a model rooted in Inuit concepts and perspectives on health and wellness and research. So these are some of the core concepts here. So Piliriqatigiinniq is, as we already said, working together for the common good or a common cause. We're all in it together, I guess. Qaujigiartiit is being respectful of all people, being mindful of the relationships we have and showing respect for that relationship in whatever form it takes. Iqaluit is the power and meaning of story and the storytelling. And so that's very common across our communities, of course, is to speak in story, to explain things through story, to learn through story, to share knowledge through story. And so that was a critical part of the model. Iqaluit is a concept that Andrew taught me about, which I think is wonderful, and it's all knowing coming into one. So everything we know coming into a place of realization and crystallization. And I guess if you've done enough research, enough narrative analysis, the best analogy I can give is to that moment where you're kind of immersed in a number of narratives, and you kind of get an aha moment. Like it all just sort of seems to become clear what everyone is telling you. And I guess Iqaluit is kind of like that coming to that place of realization. It's like analytical in many ways. And then Qaujigiartiit is to be good or kind or well. And in the early days of forming our center, we set out to develop a better understanding of how ethics were articulated in Inuktitut. So how people had been translating it previously in other research stories or research projects, and the ways in which people articulated ethics and explained it in different languages. And so Qaujigiartiit tended to be the more common one, which is just to be good. Like when my daughters, I have 2 young daughters, when they're squabbling with each other, you just say Qaujigiartiit, like stop, like you be nice to usually it's the little one picking on the big one. So just to be kind or good. And so that's how we sort of framed ethics in the model as Qaujigiartiit, to be good. And so this is a visual representation of how we had envisaged all of this. And so we have the 5 core concepts: Piliriqatigiinniq, Inuqaluit, Inuqaluit, Iqaluit, and Qaujigiartiit. And at the core of this, in the center, are our families, our community, and the people that we're all working for. And then in the next layer around all of these different groups of people that we can draw on and collaborate with to exchange and share knowledge and to implement our projects together. And it's not an exclusive list, but a list of people to remind us of all of the different types of knowledge and contributions that we can derive, that we can derive information from in our communities, like when we're all working together in an effective way and in a collaborative way. So this model was published in 2014 in the which journal? It was the International Journal of Critical Indigenous Studies. So I put the reference there, and you're welcome to check that out. So this is the visual representation of the model. Okay. So Piliriqatigiinniq is based on a relational knowledge perspective, and quite quite a few other people, especially in the sociology field, have written about relational epistemologies. And essentially the relationships between people are an important part of the framework. And this really is different from conventional research methodologies because, you know, often that the relationships are considered biasing, right, in a traditional sort of academic research approach. And whereas in our model, the relationships are essential. Essential for building trust, essential for open communication. There are many different reasons why, which I think we'll get into. But so they're an important part of the framework. Our model employs an inclusive approach rather than rejection. So all knowledge is valuable and included in the project. Everybody has something to offer. We prefer to work from that perspective. And then how is it applied? So anyone and everyone can be involved, can and should be involved in health research activities if it all means we're working toward the same goal, which is making a positive contribution to the health of our communities. And we always say that we'll work with anyone. we work with everyone and anyone. And whoever wants to work with us, you know, we work collaboratively. So and so because of that, we've worked with a whole diversity of people across our communities and actually right around the Arctic to explore different health topics that are important in our communities. So in terms of applying the model, I'm just going to dig into a little deeper to each of these core concepts and talk a little bit about how we actually apply it in our work when we're actually doing research. So for Iqaluit, we're really being respectful of one another. One of the core components is really to explain our motivations in doing our work. So for us, we never go to a community where we haven't been invited. That's a core value of our center. You know, we don't, you know, we're often asked to maybe do a survey of communities and identify, you know, gaps in services, for example, or something else, some other indicator, and then go into those communities and target them with an intervention. And that's not how we operate. We go where we're invited. So and that's our motivation. And we are completely respectful of the you know, the rights of our communities in terms of driving their own research agendas and addressing health topics in their own ways on their own time. Knowing the community context, so you know, we usually will do our homework. You know, we know our communities quite well here in Nunavut. We worked with people across all 25. And so, but we still make sure we know the context. Often we'll do an initial site visit so we can talk to people and get a sense of what's going on and, you know, just get a better understanding of what's happening today, this week in the community and, you know, why the project might be of interest or not, you know, where there might be other people to work with and bring into the project and things like that. So really just talking to people and spending time developing relationships that then become the foundation of the project. We work together to develop the research question. So at our center, about half of the work that we do is, or that half of the projects that take place here are community-based projects. So people will bring us a question and then we help them design a study that will answer it. About 40% is higher level, like territory-wide, for example. Like we're doing a study on the perspectives of community members on end-of-life care and cancer care, and to inform the development of a tool that can be used on a chart, for example, across the territory that will help prompt clinicians to ask culturally appropriate and mindful questions to patients and families when they're dealing with those difficult situations around end-of-life care and cancer care. So that's an example of something that's broader in scope, like territory-wide in scope. And then about 10% of our research is at the circumpolar level, and we work with Arctic communities in the other Arctic countries. And so in each of those cases, the research questions are derived from the communities that are directly impacted by the research. We work on developing and fostering relationships, as I said. We do that through site visits. We work with people we know or we worked with in the past. We feel that that's a critical part of the investment in the research process. And then, of course, community members are involved at every stage. Okay, so I don't know if I'm going to be repeating what the audience already knows, but storytelling is a really critical element of our way of life here in the North. The storytelling and the sharing of experiences is really a key component in communication. Stories hold lessons, and like the old stories that get passed down, they hold lessons about morals and values and knowledge about how things were in the past, how things are now. Today, stories are very powerful in terms of expressing a diversity of opinions and elevating voices, from different different perspectives in our communities. And so, in a research context, I really began to understand this concept and how it applies in terms of how it applies to a research concept when I was doing my master's degree, and I was looking at the perspectives. I was collecting narratives from women in our communities about health determinants, and one of my colleagues at the university where I was studying said that whenever I asked a question, she was going through my interview transcripts, and she said, whenever I asked a question, people always answered with a story. And I just said, yeah, like that's how we talk. and never really realizing that was different than for anybody else. And so she sort of had described the stories as like launching points for other ideas, and I thought that was kind of a neat way of framing it. But in terms of how that impacts our research, it's really on us to reflect on how the story is being told to us, on how the keeper of the story is feeling about it, how that story is protected, what the content of the story is, and really our ethical obligations to ensure the story is presented in a way that retains its original intent. So there is quite a bit written about that by Sean Wilson, who wrote, I believe it's Sean? Yes, Wilson, who wrote Research is Ceremony, and Margaret Kovach, who wrote, what's the name of her book? Sorry, I'm just blanking on it. It's right here on my bookshelf. It's Conversations in Indigenous Methodologies, I believe. And they talk about how, in conventional, and I use that, I'm kind of making a sweeping generalization, but in a lot of qualitative or narrative analysis, segments of text are coded because they raise a certain topic or a certain topic is discussed. And so that segment of text is coded, and then it's separated out from the rest, and then that sort of one line of the narrative will be singled out in an explanation in a publication as being demonstrative of a particular point being made. And they argue that taking that one line of text out of the complete narrative undermines the narrative and the keeper of the story, and which is true. And so part of having this Qaujigiartiit concept as part of our model reminds us that the story itself is sacred, or it is extremely important in the overall picture. And so to keep as much of the text or narrative together as possible, like you can't put an entire interview obviously into a research paper, or maybe you can actually, but depending on where that paper is going. But breaking it down into tiny bits of text undermines the original intent. And so just to be mindful of that, there are different ways to address those particular moments in research, but it's really on us as researchers to be mindful of how we approach that. Okay, so Iqaluit. So the concept of all knowing coming into one. Someone once said to me, it was like when I was doing my PhD, someone said writing our comprehensive exam would be like taking everything we've ever known or learned since kindergarten and being asked and being told that any of that information we've ever learned would be on the exam. Everything's up for grabs on your comprehensive exam, right back to when you were in kindergarten. Which made me laugh. And Iqaluit is kind of the opposite idea. It's not being tested on everything you've ever known since kindergarten. It's taking everything you've ever known and finding meaning and understanding in the particular topic that you're looking at. And so it's like a really rich and in-depth form of analysis. And there's a scholar named Borkin who wrote a paper, it's a chapter in a book, in 1999, and talked about immersion and crystallization in qualitative research. And so Iqaluit is kind of like that in a way, where you're immersed in your data and you're immersed in your narrative, and things start to crystallize in different ways. And that might be informed by what's going on in the community at the time, what's going on in our lives at the time as researchers and community members. And so there are different ways that data gets interpreted, but at some point in the process, you come to a place of realization of true meaning, discovering the true meaning of what's being discussed in relation to the topic. And it's really an exciting moment when it does happen. So that's sort of a reflection on our analytical process as researchers. Can you hear me okay? I noticed there's a question in the chat box about audio. It might be my terrible connection in Nunavut, so I don't know. Our internet's not that reliable. So, okay, great. Well, if you can hear, that's perfect. The final concept here is Qaujigiartiit, so to be good or kind. And so, as I had mentioned earlier, the Qaujigiartiit was one of the terms that, one of the more common terms that people had used to describe ethics. And in research, it really, we're all required to go through the TCPS2 modules now, the online modules, as part of our training as ethical researchers. And so for us, it was really about looking at how historically people participated in research projects here. And in Nunavut, some pretty unpleasant, horrifying things had been done in the name of research, including, removing people's teeth without their consent or even knowing why or what it was for. And people abused their power in our communities here, and did some really terrifying things. And so for us, we wanted to, we know that research is a tool for action, but that research itself, the word, engenders bad feelings because of what's been done in the past. And so, we really wanted to look at it from, we wanted to figure out how we were going to move forward in a way that showed goodness and kindness and good intent, without, while still kind of following a research methodology, I guess, like how we're going to marry all of these ideas. And so for us, it's, moving forward with goodness or kindness, using a heart-centered approach, making sure that everyone is informed in a meaningful way, whether that's using an oral consent process and a written consent process. Some have been really innovative using video consent processes, and which is really exciting, and really trying to shift the balance of power in the research community, or in the research, how research has been done historically, to having it led by our communities in a way that emulates the values of our communities. Of course, protecting the stories is part of this. Being good, and to be good and to be kind means to protect the stories and the experiences of others. And then lastly, how we ensure that we're accountable, we remain accountable to our communities, that what we do is rigorous and analytical and thoughtful, and mindful of our community values. So overall, the Piliriqatigiinniq is the concept for working for a common good, and that is, so that common good is the health of our communities. We developed the model in the early years of our center, and we continue to use it for every project we implement to this day. And it governs how research should be conducted within the center and by the people with whom we engage. So we're often approached by researchers from other parts of the country who want to work with us, and we send them a copy of the model. We say, we make sure that they can work on our terms before we work with them, and often, of course, they do. People are very open and to learning more about it and doing things the way we want to see them done in our communities. And so our data are collected and analyzed here in the center, and then how we share the findings is also done in a way that's holistic and collaborative. And how do I frame this? We have a good understanding, of course, how people communicate in our communities. So we want our research findings to find their way into those conversations. So we share on community radio. We have had museum exhibits to showcase photo voice projects or arts-based projects. We develop community reports, of course, in English and Inuit. We make resources available on our website. I guess now increasingly we are supposed to use social media more, but I'm not a big social media person, so other people in the office help out with that, our other staff. And of course, we publish in journals whenever we can, to make sure that the academic community is aware of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And so we're trying to get our findings out to everyone, anyone who can use them. with the priority emphasis being on our communities. So we try to make sure our communities have access to information first, and then we kind of focus on the other parts later. So in the early years of the center, we didn't publish very much because it wasn't a focus. But these days we do, because it helps us to get more funding for more research projects, to be honest, but also so we can share our findings with other members of the academic community who we know are interested in what we're doing. So the model itself is a representation of the web of relationships we have with each other, which is, as I said at the beginning, the foundation of the whole approach is being mindful and respectful of the relationships we have with each other and in our communities. It's built on the principle that anyone and everyone can and should be involved in research if we're all working for a common cause or a common outcome. And it really emphasizes the interdisciplinary approach to research, that, you know, strengths come from all directions, from anyone who has an interest, and by working together, our data analysis becomes richer. We have a diversity of perspectives and interpretations, and it just helps us to further the sharing of knowledge and the uptake of findings across sectors. So we find that, of course, working with multiple partners at different levels in different institutions and in communities helps with the uptake of findings for practical use, for action, which is also our ultimate goal, right? So we don't just do research for the sake of research. We always have some action in mind. Yes, so we use our model as an opportunity to look beyond the scope of what's commonly defined as health in research, to get away from dominant narratives that are deficit-based. Research approaches also tend to start with a deficit-based question. Not all the time. I don't want to create a sweeping generalization there, but that tends to be how questions are framed that we see in our communities. People coming to our communities, so we want to focus on everything, looking beyond that, you know, that narrative. And yeah, and so this model was really developed as a tool for our organization, but the foundations run much deeper into the values and knowledge that guide how we operate in our communities, and really touch on other areas of theory and philosophy. And here are the references. I think the slides will be available, but the different articles that I've mentioned are here. And the model itself that I mentioned has been published. It's available here. And I think I finished a little early, but I'm happy to take questions. I can see some popping up here now in the chat box. Okay, so I think, Sarah, should I just start answering questions? Okay, well, I will just do that. Start answering questions. Okay, so the first one is, okay, my contact information. Okay, that's available there. Please describe how you protect the stories. I guess what we've seen happen in the past is that someone will share a narrative for the research project, and then it kind of gets picked up and used in different forums instead of beyond just the original research intent. And so that's one example. So going back to the original person and verifying that the story can be used in other contexts. And then another example would be if the story includes information about, for example, A colleague of mine in the Northwest Territories uses traditional medicines in her work, and stories about those medicines are sacred, and they can't be shared with people who haven't been taught the ways to use those medicines appropriately. And so those narratives are to be protected from being circulated widely. And so that's what I'm talking about, I think, in terms of protecting those narratives. Okay, next question here. When you visit communities, do you seek to speak with elders first, or if not, is there an order of who is approached? No, we don't have an order. We will have been approached by someone from the community in the first place, and then we'll arrange a visit to go there and have a broader discussion in the community about the topic. So, for example, we were approached by a community to do like a healthy home survey, and so we were approached by a couple individuals from the community to help with that, and then we went there and designed the project, and it ended up being implemented by youth and elders. So the youth conducted the survey with the families, and then the elders did some helped share some public health messaging in the home, and the youth got credits towards their studies, and they had a good time working together with the elders, and then all the data were compiled and synthesized into a report that was used locally in the community to advocate for different solutions to some of the housing challenges in the community. And so in that case, and in most cases, we're approached first by one or two individuals, and then the conversation is broadened after a visit in the community. What is the difference between Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous ways of knowing? That's a good question. I would encourage you to look at some of these resources here, some of the work cited in the presentation. Often the way it's described, these are sort of more pedagogical, ontological questions, but Indigenous knowledge might be, some information that's contained in a narrative, and then the way of knowing is how we learn and interpret it and use it. So, so one is sort of process-based, maybe. I can't really articulate that effectively, I think, at this moment, but I would encourage you to look at some of these other resources from others who have written more extensively on the topic. What do you do when community members disagree on priorities? I don't know that we've ever come across that. I think, we often operate by consensus, so we wouldn't move forward on a topic unless everyone was in agreement. And so whether that means changing the method or the question or shifting directions, everyone has to agree before we move forward. The next question is, please give some concrete health improvements that have resulted from the research. Sure. So from that Healthy Homes survey, it was in response to an outbreak of infectious illness in the community, and not long after the project concluded, the outbreak ended. So we can't definitively attribute it to that project, but we hope that it was part of the solution. Let me think. There are a number of instances where the evidence from our project's been used in the development of different policies and protocols used by our government. We know that the evidence has been used. We conducted a case study on best practices in suicide prevention that was used in a report from the Arctic Council under Canada's chairmanship of the Arctic Council. We our data has been used to inform the development of different public health interventions, like around sexual health and relationships, project for targeting, not targeting, but designed for young people in our communities. We've developed and implemented a parenting support program based on Inuit child-rearing philosophy that we can demonstrate has had positive outcomes for the people who participated. So there are quite a few examples that we know have shown positive results from our research projects. Could you tell us more about using video consent, how it works, and the benefits? So that would be more procedural, like if the participants, it was used, for example, in the Inuit Health Survey, so that wasn't one of our projects, but one that I helped out with. And so for all the participants who were part of that survey, if they had to have a blood sample taken or any other kind of sample taken, or even just in the video just shown, people were, so in the video they were shown exactly what the procedure would look like, and even just sitting and being interviewed. And so it ensured people had a good understanding of what they would be participating in if they consented to be in the survey, and they had enough time to view the video and then think about it before they were shown the video with quite a bit of time in between that and participating in the survey. So there was lots of time for questions and thinking about it. So that was a really good example of using video for consent. What were some of the challenges encountered? We always end up writing these reports, research, the end of our funding grants and our research reports, and I think that some of the biggest challenges we encounter are weather, like just getting from A to B with blizzards and snowstorms and things like that. That's just our life, the reality of our life, so we don't really call it a challenge. But our timelines are always impacted by that. We can't always do things when we plan to, and we just find a way around it. The other challenge we face is when we do have multiple partners on projects, we find there's a lot of turnover in staffing in our government, territorial government. And so when we do partner with our territorial government on a project, sometimes the person who we'll be working with will leave for another position, and we're reorienting someone else to the project, the next person who comes in, and so we had a 5-year project that ended in 2015, and we in one position we had 5 different people that we worked with who were in that one position over 5 years. So things like that, like it's hard to move things forward when we encounter that kind of turnover among our partners. But that's it. Like most of the time, everything works really well, I think.
Gwen.
Are you finding tension between expectations around ethical protocols?
It's okay, Gwen. I was just going to say we could hear you, but we haven't been able to speak, and I just want to apologize that you've had to read the questions and answer them, and just so you know what happened. We've been here listening to you. You're doing a wonderful job of answering the questions, and that's all that happened. So we can help now by reading and let you think of answers if you like. So maybe with the next question from Natalie, really wondering if you're finding tension between expectations around ethical protocols from funding sources and the ethical actions based on community ways of knowing, or have you seen a gradual shift to more acceptance of the model that you're using?
I think that in our early years that we did feel that tension, but now I don't think we do at all. And often that comes from just being able to explain what we're doing and why. I know in the early years we really experienced tension really just on the area of compensation. Like we will compensate, for example, if participants do a long interview or if they participate in the sharing circle or something like that, we'll compensate them with a gift card to the local store, grocery store, in the amount of a pack of diapers, basically, like a big pack of diapers, you know, if it's a family study, for example. And here in Nunavut, that's $50. So if an REB in the South is reviewing our protocol, you know, $50 to them is a bribe, and for us, it's a pack of diapers. so being able to explain things like that, like, you know, we can show the cost of groceries in the north, and we can explain ourselves to any REB, and because of the nature of an REB and the questions they ask, they are often very welcoming of our opinion and our explanations for why we do things the way we do. And we haven't really experienced any tension since. Like, I think most are familiar with how we operate at this point.
Gwen, a very interesting question has come in, another question, and it's about the stories and teachings of elders down through the generations. And the question is, then how is knowledge gained in the sense of what is used to understand new things? Is there a different means, or is it the same? How does that work?
I think that's more a response to that earlier question too about Indigenous knowledge versus ways of knowing, and or what's the difference. And yeah, so knowing is how that knowledge is gained, and that comes from different ways. Like, it can come through song and through story and through experiential learning and on and on. Yeah.
Gwen, is there any sense, or has there been feedback that just by recording, you've talked about the importance of protecting the story, you've talked about honoring the intent of the story, being true to the story. Is there any sense of just by recording it alone, does that change the story or have an impact in any way?
That would be that's a great question. I think that would be probably on a case-by-case basis. Like, you'd have to ask the person you're interviewing. You know, there are some beliefs around photographs, like by taking a picture of an individual, you know, maybe somehow you've captured the spirit of that individual, or it may somehow harm the individual. And not in our communities, but in other communities around the world. And so, you know, maybe the act of recording that narrative, some people may have strong feelings about that. So it's why it's always important to ask. Always important to ask, for sure.
Thanks, Gwen. Another question.
Yeah,
what
that
would
be
you
part of the
say?
consent process as well.
Right. What would you say is the best practice for building a new relationship, and how do you ensure that relationship can be sustained in the long term?
I guess reaching out and talking to people is the best way, you know, making sure that your topic is aligned with topics that are of interest in the community, and then talking to the people who are interested in that particular topic. For us, we are, as I said, we're usually contacted first, and so someone reaches out to us to to develop a new relationship or explore collaboration. In terms of how we ensure the relationship is sustained in the long term, we just always stay in touch. We make sure we're always communicating, on the phone or on email, and for long-term projects or long-term. I'm trying to think of an example actually, but in one community, one project ended and it just led into another project that we decided to work on together, and then more after that. And so we just keep working together. That's how the relationship is sustained in the long term for us.
When one of our Knowledge Hub colleagues, Renee from British Columbia, she's wondering whether your research is mainly qualitative or whether you do mixed methods, including quantitative. And do you use standardized data collection tools, or do you create your own customized ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do mixed methods studies as well as sort of more purely qualitative ones, I suppose. And so we do use some tools. We kind of I can give an example, like where we were implementing a project with youth, and there was no really good standardized tool for our population, and or one that even really translated well. And so we adapted. We often end up adapting tools that already exist. So we know which indicators we want to collect. Like we want to look at developing a sense of agency and connection to community and questions like that, identifying if they feel they have, really good relationships with their peers and control over their lives. And so we'll take a standardized tool and try to adapt it. And then we have to go through, a process of course, trying to validate it. And we get a lot of feedback, of course, from our communities and whoever we're working with on the project to make sure it's valid for what we're trying to achieve. And then, so often we end up kind of creating our own tools and adapting existing ones.
Gwen, Marianne has a question. She talks about so many times research has been done in our communities and then the results have benefited others, large corporations, financially, for instance, with no benefit at all back to the community. And she's wondering, how do you protect your shared research from becoming a financial base for some other corporation's benefit with no return back to the original community or the participants in the research, or being claimed as the property of the corporation instead of the property of the community?
Yes, yeah, that's definitely a concern for us. Because we try to make our information as widely available as possible so our communities can use it in different ways, that has come back to bite us, where we find our information synthesized in consultant reports with no acknowledgement of where the information came from. So we find our information repackaged and then sold back to whoever is the audience for it. And so we have become more careful since then of what we put online, and that's also made us push to publish more so that it's in the peer-reviewed literature as well. Unfortunately, the real compromise has been how much we put online and make available through that avenue. It makes it more widely accessible to our communities to have it online, but also to people who don't have the same intent or motivation. So that's one thing. We try to make it available to whoever reaches out for it or we know is looking for it. yeah, and then claiming it as property of the corporation instead of the community. That's a really challenging situation. And we've seen that in the research community for sure, where, researchers have claimed that samples they've collected belong to, the university or to the researcher and not to the community. I think that there's been quite a lot of positive momentum with the Tri-Council policy statement in terms of how these situations are governed in the research context. For corporations, though, yeah, that's a really tough one. It's just, you've got to protect it as much as possible. And then I think there's probably a fight ahead to get the property back from the corporation. Yeah, that's a tough area. I think that we're all still trying to figure out how to negotiate those situations.
Obviously, Gwen, there's lots of comments that are telling you how much people are enjoying your presentation and how excellent it has been. I just wanted to put that in before our next question. What do you suggest as Indigenous knowledge or culture to be included in the non-Indigenous education system to help the next generation in building a broader and deeper understanding of peoples living on this land?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a great question. I would put it out to communities actually to answer it. I don't know that I could speak on behalf. I would open it up to our communities across Canada and ask them what do you want to have shared with the next generation, and see what it would be. An amazing diversity of stories and perspectives that would come out of that question, I think, which would be really exciting.
Gwen, I think at this point what we'd like to do is express our appreciation that we weren't able to do when we weren't able to connect and be heard. And your presentation, it was accessible. I think it was so helpful. And maybe if we could end our questions with asking you, what advice would you have for people from outside of the community who may be working with somebody from the community in another location, for instance, maybe in Ottawa or Montreal, in a health setting or another kind of support setting? What would be your advice, one, to people trying to provide support, and in particular to people who may be doing research with people from the northern communities who may be located temporarily in a more southern community?
I guess I would just encourage people to spend time developing those relationships. Spending time getting to know who it is you're working with, and investing in that way. I would encourage everyone to approach these interactions from a place of self-awareness and humility, myself included. When I'm somewhere new and meeting new people, I try to do that as well, or that's what guides my approach. So not everyone, there isn't one approach that fits all, but those would be my recommendations. Really investing in the relationships and being self-aware and mindful of the context of all the people we're working with.
excellent words to conclude our webinar, Gwen. Thank you so much for your generosity in sharing this information with us. I know that just by watching the information in the chat box that people have found it very valuable. And thank you for making your slides available to us. And again, Sarah will let everybody know when those are posted in a few days, as well as the recording of this webinar. And we just remind people to either look for the link in the chat box in order to fill out the evaluation, or Sarah will send it out to everybody who registered. So Gwen, Dr. Healey, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, and we'll look forward to talking with you later. Bye for now, everyone.